Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Teaching Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amantillado, a Common Core close reading seminar sponsored by America in Class from the National Humanities Center. I'm Richard Schramm. I'm the Vice President for Education Programs here at the Center, and I'll be moderating this evening's session. Before we get underway, let me take a few minutes to introduce you to the National Humanities Center. We're located in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. We are the country's only independent institute for advanced study in all branches of the humanities. Let me see if I can explain that. First of all, we're independent. That means we're a private nonprofit organization. We're an institute for advanced study, which means that the main program we offer here is a fellowship program that brings scholars from this country and abroad to the Humanities Center, usually for an academic year, to research and write on topics in the humanities. Subjects like history, literature and language studies, philosophy, criticism of the arts, that sort of thing. We opened in 1978. Since then, about 1,400 scholars have worked here, and they've produced about 1,400 books. Now, that may make the place sound like an ivory tower, and when you look at these pictures, it looks like an ivory tower. We even have a spiral staircase running right up through the middle of the place, but it's not an ivory tower. The founders wanted it to reach a wide variety of audiences, and they were particularly interested in reaching teachers. We do that in a variety of ways. You can find out just how we do that by going to americainclass.org. That will put you on this page, and from this page you can gain access to all of the resources and programs the National Humanities Center offers for teachers. After our seminar this evening, please go back to the Cask of Amantillado webpage, the page from which you obtained your readings and entered the classroom tonight. There you will find a recording of the presentation along with the PowerPoint. Feel free to plunder the PowerPoint. It's there for you. Take it into your classrooms. Use it however you wish. On this webpage, you will also find a link to an evaluation. Please fill that evaluation out for us and send it back to us. We pay attention to what you tell us. They are very important to us. Once we have received your evaluation, we will send you a letter that you'll be able to submit to your local certifying authority to obtain whatever recertification credit your participation in the seminar warrants. Now let me explain how the seminar will work this evening. Eliza Richards will be talking about the Cask of Amantillado. We'll be stopping from time to time to ask some discussion questions. To respond to those questions, put your cursor in the little area that we've bracketed in green there. Type your message. Click on that send icon to the right, and your message will appear in the chat box above the send button. I'll be following the chat all night, bringing it into the conversation at appropriate times. Now, don't wait to send us a message just when we pose a question. If you have a question, send it to us. I'll bring it into the conversation and try to address it. And if you have any comments to make about our discussion this evening, please send us those as well. The seminars really work best when we have a lot of exchange on the chat. So don't hesitate to pose your own questions and make your own comments as we go along. As I say, I'll try to bring all of them into the conversation. Can't promise that we'll have time to cover everything you say and ask, but I'll do my best to get them in. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's get underway and let's talk about the point of this evening's session, the intellectual takeaway. Poe's horror stories, The Fall of the House of Usher, The Telltale Heart, and The Cask of Amantillado, for example, are keystones in the Gothic tradition. Poe is known for internalizing the Gothic. He moved terror from the external world of ghosts and vampires to the psychological world of the deranged murderer. As Poe himself says, "My terror is not of Germany, but of the soul." Focusing on close textual analysis of a single story, considered to be one of Poe's best, we will explore how the story conveys terror to readers with intricate language play, puns, ironies, foreshadowings, and double entendres. We'll also locate the story in the broader cultural context, Gothic tradition, the temperance movement, and obsessions with premature burial. So that's what we'll be trying to do this evening, give you some idea of how the story works and how it fits into a larger cultural context. We'll be exploring these questions. The Cask of Amantillado is a revenge tale in which revenge is exacted according to specific requirements. What are those requirements and how are they fulfilled? How does the narrator's attentiveness to language help him achieve his revenge? What is the role of puns, ironies, foreshadowing, and double entendre in the story? What is Poe's theory of the unity of effect, and how does it work in the Cask of Amantillado? What is the Gothic? What is Poe's place in the Gothic tradition? How does the story engage with broader cultural preoccupations like temperance? Is there any way it engages distinctly American concerns? We'll be looking at those questions plus some others, questions that you sent us on the forum. Why was Poe so fixated on death? Is the story about more than revenge? How was the story received when it was published? Was Poe's audience largely female? And finally, were other American writers producing horror fiction in Poe's time? To lead us through these questions, we're very pleased to have with us tonight Eliza Richards, a professor of English and Comparative Literature at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Eliza was a National Humanities Center Fellow in 2010 and 11, and her project here was an exploration of Civil War journalism and photography. She's written widely about 19th century culture, including gender and the poetics of reception in Poe's circle. So, Eliza, let me turn on your microphone and turn the program over to you. It's all yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Richard. Hello, everybody. It's nice to be here this evening. And this is one of my favorite stories, so I'm glad I have a chance to talk about it with you. Right from the beginning of the first paragraph, the narrator starts laying out what his plans are for the story. And we can get hints about how to read the story from this very first paragraph, which I'll read to you now. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could. But when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitively settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. So Montresor is speaking, and he's the narrator of the tale and the murderer. What is his theory of proper revenge?
That one? While we're waiting for people to respond to that question about Montresor's theory of revenge, we have a question in the chat, Eliza. Could we have some context why Poe likened his terror not to that of Germany? What was he referring to there? What did he mean by German terror?
Well, Germany at the time was a place, German Romanticism was one of the origins of the Gothic tradition, and a place where people were already writing about ghosts and spirits and ghouls, and externalizing terror. And we'll talk a little bit about that later when we talk about the origin of the Gothic. But when Poe says, my terror is not of Germany, it's of the soul, what he's stressing there is that I'm not interested in external horrors, the way that they're propounded in German literature. I care more about the terror and the horrors of the human personality and the human soul.
Mm-hmm. So the European terror was more external, as you say, and the real terror here is not just the killing of Fortunato, but the real terror is in the mind of Montresor, that monstrous, murderous, carefully calculated evil mind.
Not the physical torture so much as what Montresor is thinking, his perversity.
Okay, now we've got some responses here. People are saying that his theory of revenge includes being able to get away with impunity. Let's see what else. Okay, it's also that a wrong is unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt. So impunity and the victim must be aware of his victimization.
Those are the two basic principles, and they're really central to the entire story. That he has to get away with it without being caught. And you can tell that he has just from this first paragraph, right? Because he's confessing it much later. And his victim needs to understand exactly what's happened to him and why. Great. So how might that help us read the story that follows those rules that Montessori sets out for us in the beginning of the story.
We have one here, a response to that question already. Reading clues. The reader is now waiting for the backstory to unfold. We're looking to see if he's going to get away with this, and we're looking to see if his victim suffers in the way he does. Is
Great.
that fair to say?
Yeah. Yeah, he's directed our attention in a specific ways, and so now we're looking for the ways that he's going to exact his revenge and how he's going to get away with it without being caught, and how he's going to make Fortunato aware of what he has done wrong, though we don't know yet what it is that Fortunato has done.
Right.
And the last question is who is this you that he's addressing here? Right from the beginning, in the second sentence, it's clear that the first person narrator is speaking to someone. Do we have any sense of who that person is? It's the only time in the story that that person is addressed.
We have some speculation here. One participant writes, "You is perhaps a family member."
Yeah,
Maybe.
why would it be why would it be someone familiar rather than someone unknown?
Someone familiar? Well, he says here, "You who so well know the nature of my soul." So it suggests there that the person to whom he's talking knows him quite well.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, exactly. There's a sense that it might be a confession of some sort. Maybe the narrator's in prison. Maybe the narrator's on the verge of death and he wants to clear his conscience. At any rate, the person knows him very intimately, and yet he's never told the person this story. Great. The other thing it does is bring the reader in, right? Because we can't help but feel that we are the you that's being addressed. So it ropes us into the story in a pretty direct way.
Yeah, and it also suggests some sympathy between the reader and Montresor. You know, he's saying, "You know well the nature of my soul." Is he suggesting there that we may have some sympathy? Is Poe suggesting that some of this evil lurks in all humankind?
Yes, yeah, I think that's part of the terror of Poe's tales and the terror that's in the soul, not of Germany, that maybe all of us are capable of this sort of thing, not
Hmm.
just arranged people, that we all
Yeah.
have what he calls an imp of the perverse in another story within us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We have an interesting comment here. The you is a confidant. He is confessing the crime, making us complicit in his crime, much like in the Telltale Heart. The narrator assumes a kinship with the reader or whoever is hearing this. Very good point. Well stated.
Yes, that's great. That's exactly right. That's wonderful. So right after he introduces us to his theory of revenge, well, not exactly right after, but there are resonances when he tells Fortunato about his coat of arms. The Montresors, I replied, were a great and numerous family. And Fortunato replies, I forget your arms. Montresor says, a huge human foot door in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant, whose fangs are embedded in the heel. And the motto? Nemo me impuni lascit, which means no one provokes me with impunity. So how does this, what words and ideas are echoed here that are introduced in the first paragraph? And why is this coat of arms significant for the story?
Hey, any takers on that one? It's really an ambiguous coat of arms, I think. You don't quite know which one is the Montresor's family. We have some insight. This coat of arms explains some insight into Montresor's character. Certainly, the motto does. That's for sure. Why he is obsessed with revenge. Yeah, that takes us back to the motto. No one provokes me with impunity. We have repeated insult that we have the repeated insult that even though the Montresors are a great family, Fortunato doesn't remember them. Yeah, very good point in that passage.
That's great.
So he's
Yeah, I
saying
forget your
somehow.
arms. Already, that's a sign of Fortunato's oblivion
Mhm.
and his
Mhm.
insult to the Montresors' previous greatness, and a sign that they've fallen from greatness, that maybe they were a greater family in the past than they are
Mhm.
in the present, and Fortunato is more successful than they are. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's great.
Yeah. Well,
Yes,
what? Go ahead.
Oh, the coat of arms is, it's hard to know which person, which thing is the snake, the one who's the provocateur, or is
Hmm.
it the foot? Because it's kind of a cyclical situation where each is punishing the other for what the other has done. So that's
Hmm.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, and it suggests that both the owner of the foot and the snake will suffer, will die. The foot will kill the
Yeah,
snake.
there's no, it's a no-win situation. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
And yes,
yeah.
it does bring up too. Someone mentioned that it brings up the word impunity from the first paragraph, but there, I need to have revenge with impunity, um, and no, I must punish with impunity, and no one provokes me with impunity. So there's an echo there between those two phrases.
Hmm.
Great.
Okay, well, shall we move on?
Yeah. Um, so another stipulation in this story, besides the idea that he needs to have revenge with impunity and the person must understand what's happened to him, is that he's not going to give any clue to Fortunato of what he's doing. And it's in the second paragraph. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. Um, so, why is it so important to Montresor that he pretends that he's still friendly?
Yeah,
And what
why
does
is
this proclamation suggest about the way he'll go about exacting his revenge?
why is that important? We have a question here. Um, was an easy definition for impunity for ninth grade students. Another participants responded freedom from punishment, but I think for ninth graders, you could just tell them, you do something wrong and you get away with it. Simple enough, do you think, Eliza?
Yeah, that seems pretty
Yeah.
pretty
They,
clear. Yeah.
they'd
And
understand that.
impunity has the word punish in it. So lots of times students are interested in the ways that Latin suggests words in English. So, and I'm sure they know the word punish.
Mhm. Okay, so getting back to our discussion question, it's important so that he presents himself as a friend of Fortunato because it's important that he can lure him away from the others into the wine cellar. He will be duplicitous. He has to
That's
gain the
great. Yeah.
trust. Yeah, he
Yeah,
wants
the
him to.
smile now means two things. He will be duplicitous, and that's really key to the whole story because now everything's going to have a double meaning the way his smile does. On the one hand, Fortunato thinks he's being friendly. On the other hand, his smile means to him that he's enjoying his revenge.
Mhm.
That's great.
We have a very good comment here. It is important that to Montresor that he prove himself to be wiser and craftier than Fortunato in the end. He wants to make Fortunato feel the fool in the end, and that's a good insight because Fortunato is
That's
dressed as a fool.
Yeah, and that's our next slide. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's underscored. That's a great point, and it's underscored by the significance of the costumes that they're dressed in. It's Carnival, and so they're dressed up, sort of like Halloween. They're dressed up in costumes that have symbolic significance. So Fortunato's costume is described this way: the man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. And Montresor um, says that, thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm, putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person. I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. So we've already gotten into this, but what do the costumes signify here, and why is it important that they're dressed the way they're dressed?
Okay, we've talked about Fortunato's fool costume, but what about Montresor's costume? What can we see in that? And while folks are responding to that, we had some a couple of interesting comments about what Montresor is playing upon. Is he playing upon Fortunato's pride or his lust for alcohol? We
Uh,
can talk about that when we get to this story as a temperance story, or do you want to address that now, Eliza?
Whether he's getting at, I think he's praying, you're absolutely right. In both cases, he's playing on the weaknesses of Fortunato, and that's part of what Fortunato is going to be thinking about. What are his weaknesses when he's walled up in the tomb?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
definitely, Montresor knows Fortunato well enough to know that Fortunato loves alcohol. He loves drinking, and it's not helpful that he's drunk right now. And the other thing is, he does seem to be more proud, doesn't he? He seems to be complacent in his sense of superiority to Montresor. So there are all these minor slights that suggest that Fortunato has no doubt about his social standing. So
Hmm.
that's great.
So
And
Montresor he's in black. He's in a long black robe. He signifies death. He's not masked right now, but he soon will be, as we know. Let's
well,
see
he's
what
putting on a
Yeah.
mask of black silk. Yeah.
Hmm.
Uh, so
And
he has a mask. Well, yeah. So it suggests that his intentions are hidden. Um,
right, and silk signifies luxury and success. So his family may have fallen upon hard times, but they're living in genteel poverty, perhaps.
that's great.
Also, yeah, also he's got to have that loose-fitting robe because he's hiding something in there, isn't he?
Yes, that's right. He needs to have his baggy outfit on.
Yeah,
So the
yeah.
names also, everything has significance in the story, and the names have some significance too. Montresor and Fortunato. What might be the significant? I know they're in another language. Montresor suggests French, right? So there's a suggestion that Montresor might be a Frenchman, and Fortunato is probably Italian, and they're probably in Italy. So Montresor, so there's a difference in their ethnicity to some degree. But what else might their names signify, even if we don't speak those other languages?
Well, one participant has already nailed Montresor. Montresor, my treasure in French.
Great. And how might that relate to the story, My Treasure? Um, why would he be named that if it has some meaning for the story?
Yeah, what? Okay, what would that mean? Montresor, my treasure. What treasure is Montresor talking about? Any takers on
Yeah.
that one? Fortunato, it's easy. The fortunate one. A little bit of irony
Yeah,
there, not so fortunate this time. All right, Linda.
that's
His pride, Montresor's pride. His
that's right.
treasure
Yep.
is his pride. His
Yep.
family name.
Good.
Um, yeah, his treasure is his pride and his family name. Yeah,
Great.
okay. And
Yeah,
then
yeah. So they're laden with significance that you can even see even if you don't speak the languages. And Poe, though he studied languages, he wasn't fluent in any other language but English, and he's always playing around with the sounds of other words and embedding meanings in them that you could read even if you only spoke English. And a
mhm.
flasson of de Grave is the kind of wine that Montessor gives to Fortunato while they're walking through the catacombs. And that's kind of obvious what that means, but it's a sort of funny pun in the middle of it.
Yeah, that's one of the Poe does play some things in this for laughs. I mean, this is a macabre story, and is horrifying at the end, but he does get some laughs off.
That's
Dark
right.
ones, ironic
Yes, it's
ones, like
comic as well
Flasson
as
de Grave. Yeah, and then
yeah.
the extended coughing scene where he goes on for it seems like 20 coughs there, and and Fortunato was saying, "Oh, the cough is nothing. Don't worry about it," and he can barely speak for a few minutes.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, and we're going to get to that passage in a minute.
Hmm.
So throughout, the same way the smile is doubled in the beginning, the language is doubled throughout the story. It has a double meaning, and Montresor cultivates his revenge through the double meanings in his exchanges. And this is one of the first ones. We'll look at a few of these double meanings. And of course, Fortunato is the one that repeats Amantillado over and over again. Amantillado, I have my doubts. Amantillado, and I must satisfy them. Amontillado. Um, so, what is the double meaning here, and what's the significance of that double meaning for the story?
Okay, what double entendres are going on here? They satisfy, revenge. Yes, he's going to satisfy something. It's going to satisfy his desire for revenge.
Good,
What else?
yeah. But in the face of it, he just is having his doubt about whether it's sherry, whether it's some average form of sherry or the true Amontillado. And that encompasses both of the problems with Fortunato, that he loves drinking and that he's a snob. So he thinks he's the only one who can tell if it's real Amontillado. And both of those lure him down to the catacombs. So seemingly they're just talking about whether it's Amontillado or not, but Montresor is already talking about his revenge.
Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting the way Montresor reels him in because he never says, "Oh yeah, yeah, definitely it's Amontillado." He appeals to his connoisseurship. I'm not sure.
that's
I
right.
really need a connoisseur, and that's when he brings in Lucchese. I was going to ask Lucchese, and then Fortunato. Oh, Lucchese doesn't know anything, so he really is diabolical in the way he plays to Fortunato's pride and connoisseurship and
Yes.
his arrogance. Really skillful. All right, here we go.
Yep, he's very.
Please explain the reference to collected in a heap from the reading. I don't see the significance of Amontillado. I think that, when does that come up? You recall that phrase, collected in a heap,
I,
in the
I
story?
I don't see the significance of Amontillado. I'm sorry, I'm not clear on the question.
Yeah.
Um,
I think maybe collected in a heap comes at the end. I'm not sure when. At the
they're
end
the
of the
bones
story.
that are collected in a
Yeah,
heap.
I think
Um,
so. Think so. The bones turn into a pile. We'll come to that as we move through the end of the story. And I have not been able to see any significance in the choice of Amontillado. Are you? Is there any critical examination of that particular wine, Eliza, that we
there is.
could?
So the word is repeated over and over and over again. So people have tried to come to some, and since so many other things have symbolic meaning in a story, like Fortunato and Montresor and the costumes, critics have spilled a lot of ink trying to figure out what the meaning of Amontillado is. But I don't think anyone's really come to anything terribly significant. So
Mhm.
maybe someone out there has some kind of idea about what Amontillado means. Here, it just simply shows, on the surface, it shows that Fortunato's obsessed with, he wants to drink the Amontillado, right? And he wants to prove his connoisseurship. So, and it's a sign that he's a bit drunk too, right?
Mhm.
Because he's not terribly articulate throughout the story. So all those things are definitely intended by the repetition of the word, but maybe it has some kind of symbolic meaning.
Mhm. Well, it's a rare wine certainly today, and maybe it was a rare wine back in the 19th century as well. It certainly was. It certainly sounds exotic, so
Yeah,
it would
that's
convince
right.
me that it's. If you found a bottle of it, I'd be interested in it too. I wouldn't go down to a catacomb, but I'd be interested. Rare Spanish wine. Okay, yeah,
Yes,
there we go. Pink is
right. So now
rare
we have
Spanish wine.
French, Italian, and Spanish. So for an American audience, it would have a veneer of exoticism, and I think that's important. And Poe plays with that a lot. He spent some time in England as a child. He studied in a private school there, and he's often um, playing to the American fascination with Europe in his stories. So that's interesting. That might be one of the reasons there. Because this, of course, appeared in a popular magazine. It's Popular Entertainment. It appeared in Godey's Lady's Book in 1846.
Well, while we're on that, maybe we could. Oh, now you're mentioning where it was published. Maybe we could knock off two of our form questions quickly. How was the story received when it was published? Was it popular? Did it get a lot of circulation, a lot of comments?
Well, Poe, there aren't a lot of reviews of this story. And he wasn't as well known for his stories as he was for his poetry. And he
Hmm.
was never terribly successful during his lifetime, though he was known, especially after the publication of The Raven, his famous poem, The Raven, in 1845. So this would be in the wake of The Raven, and Godey's Lady's Book is one of the most popular middle class publications of the time. So it certainly was um, a coup to publish in Godey's Lady's Book. They were one of the highest paying magazines of the time. But there aren't a lot of reviews of that particular story or responses to that story in the magazines of the time. So,
Mhm.
you know, but it was a form of popular entertainment and a sign that he was um, a writer recognized for his entertainment value, that the story was included in Godey's Lady's Book.
And that raises another question from the forum. Being published in Godey's Lady's Book, does that suggest that his primary audience was female?
No, not at all. Poe was an editor of Graham's magazine. Graham's magazine was another very popular magazine of the period, one of the most popular magazines. Um, they did advertise both Godey's Lady's Book and Graham's to a leisured female audience. Women, of course, most of them, especially if they were middle class, didn't work, and
Mhm.
their job was to stay at home and show how successful their husbands were by performing their leisure in conspicuous ways, like reading magazines and not cleaning the house. They had servants to do that. So women were a prominent reading audience, especially middle class women at the time. But everybody read Godey's Lady's Book, and everybody read Graham's magazine. So Poe's audience was both male and female. The women were particularly attracted to uh, his Byronic, his sense of being doomed as a person.
Mhm.
If he had a form of celebrity, uh, it was that he was a lost soul who himself drank too much and was extremely gifted but couldn't manage to succeed financially and was constantly getting into fights with people. And that tended to make women, tended to make him appealing to women in particular in his time.
And while we're talking about his popular context of his publication here, why don't we, excuse me, why don't we dispense with another question from the forum? Were other American writers producing horror fiction at this time? Now, you said in
Yes.
Europe they were. What about in the United States?
Yes, Poe is, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But Poe was these stories are very much participating in broader cultural movements in literature. Um, he's playing with and participating in the movement, the interest in sensation fiction in particular. So one of his best friends was named George Lepard, who wrote a best-selling underground story called The Monks of Monk Hall, the Quaker City, about a collection of evildoers who set up house in an empty monastery and tortured people for fun in there, and that was quite that was quite a popular story. And you see it, you see the strain of horror in other well-known writers of the period, like Nathaniel Hawthorne, who is
Mhm.
Poe's contemporary, something like The Birthmark or Rappaccini's Daughter, which
Right.
may also be taught in the ninth grade. I'm not sure, but The Scarlet Letter. They all have elements of horror and a lot of Melville stories as well.
Mhm.
Benito Cereno is a kind of horror story as
Yeah,
well as some of
yeah.
his other stories. Yeah.
You know,
So it
with
was a
Hawthorne,
popular mode.
yeah, and
Say again?
Hawthorne too. You have young Goodman Brown. I mean, the Devil's Sabbath. If you could give
That's
us the
right.
name of his friend again, so that we have participant asking for that. If you could, what was Poe's friend's name again? Who wrote the
Oh,
monks of
George
Monk Hall?
Lepard, Lippard, George Lepard, and it's called The Quaker City. It's a kind of reform fiction that participates in the temperance mode, but it was very popular. People were interested in reading about urban scandal, and
Hmm.
so kind of urban sensation fiction sprung up in that period, and Lepard was one of the best known writers of that kind of fiction. Yeah.
Okay.
And you can buy a copy of it. It's come out in paperback recently again. So.
Okay. Well, why don't we get back to our close reading? One of our participants said that this is her favorite passage because she likes the dark humor in it.
Yes, come, I said with decision. Oh, okay, this is preceded by the cough that Richard was mentioning that goes on, but I didn't feel like reading the cough, the ugh, 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 ugh that goes on for 3 lines. Come, I said with decision. We will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucchesi. Enough, he said. The cough is a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough. True, true, I replied. So what are some of the double, there are a bunch of double entendres here. And what are some of them, I find them funny. What are some of the more amusing ones?
Yeah, so what do we point out to our students to help them see the irony and humor in this? And the true, yeah, he's not going to die of a cough. And of course, Montresor knows that. You can imagine Montresor hiding his grin.
Underscores that with true.
Yeah.
Yep, he won't die of a cough.
One of our questions was, is this story about more than revenge? And I think this passage, plus the other ones we've looked at, suggest that obviously it is more. It is about more than revenge. I mean, this is a study of a psychopathic mind. This is a probing the mind of a killer. So it is about revenge, but it is also sort of a character study of a murderer, a cold-blooded murder. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, sure. And I do think so, yes. And he's doing everything he can to underscore what he's doing to Fortunato, even as he gets away with it. And Fortunato remains clueless, which, as someone said in the posts, makes Montresor feel superior and gives him back a sense of what he's lost in terms of his ego. It's also a character study of Fortunato, because everything he does is keyed to Fortunato's personality. So it's a highly psychological story, and it gives us some insight into not just the deranged murderer, but it gives us the pleasure of revenge as well. Of revenge that we wouldn't want to enact, but we might like to see it enacted vicariously. Yeah.
We have
any
another.
other? Yeah, go ahead.
We have another one here about when Montresor tells Fortunato that he will be missed.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You are a man to be missed, and that's right in the future tense. It's ambiguous because it could mean generally everyone. You're so important that if you weren't around, people would miss you. But also the future tense suggests that soon he will be missing. And for Montresor, it is no matter. In which case, it could mean no one misses me, or it could mean I don't care if you're going to be missed. In fact, I appreciate the fact that you will be missed in a little while. So.
And we had someone doing a really close reading here and commenting on the use of the dash between true and true, not a comma, but a dash. And I think that's that was deliberate, obviously, on Poe's part to have us pause.
Yeah, he cared a lot about this kind of thing. Yeah, you're right. It's a gap and a pause to underscore the double meaning that still Fortunato doesn't get yet. So yes.
Yeah.
Is it more
increases? Yeah, it increases the kind of diabolical quality to his comment. True. You can just hear him rolling that out.
Yep, that's great. And here's another funny exchange between them. Fortunato says they have a toast in the catacombs. I drink, he said, to the buried that repose around us. And Montresor says, an eye to you to your long life.
Yeah, Poe wasn't subtle, was he?
Say again,
That
Richard?
we, Poe wasn't very subtle in his irony. No pun intended here, but he kind of laid it on with a trowel, didn't he? I'm sorry.
He sure
I won't
did.
do
He's
that
got
again.
his yep, his
Okay.
um, he's underscoring it, but still, it's important that he lay it on thick, um, for the for Fortunato's sake, for the future of the story, right? Because Fortunato's going to have something to think about while he's walled up in the catacombs, and this will come back to him, or that's what Montresor is hoping.
Yeah,
So
a participant makes another really insightful comment here, which speaks to the quality of Montresor's mind. You can also see how well Montresor knows Fortunato and allows you to see how long he has been studying him in order to be able to have this revenge. So he really
yep.
has been, this is an obsessive man here. He's been concentrating on Fortunato. And it's interesting, we have absolutely no idea what insult, well, we do. He forgot Montresor's family. But it seems like a pretty small insult to be walled up in a catacomb over.
Yes, he hasn't. Montresor feels Montresor hasn't identified the precise
Yeah.
insult. We have to derive it from Fortunato's behavior, and
Yeah.
we have to some degree. We've talked about it here, that Fortunato is kind of consistently um, condescending, and clearly thinks that he's better than Montresor.
Hmm.
And Montresor, that's been cumulatively upsetting to Montresor, and probably Fortunato did something along those lines, but Montresor never tells us what it is. That's great. And that's why it's good that Fortunato is drinking to the buried that repose around us, because he's beginning to acknowledge Montresor's uh, important family. Um, but he doesn't really understand the seriousness of of the toast he's just made there. Um,
Right. And that focus on the obsessive mind, that's a theme throughout Poe. I mean, that's not just represented in this story, right?
that's right, yeah. The
Yeah.
monomaniac. That
Yeah.
was the term in the 19th century, monomania. And he's not the only one to be interested in it, but he is one of the people that really explores monomania in a kind of sustained way in his stories. Um, the mind that now we would probably call it obsessive compulsive
Hmm.
behavior, sociopathy or psychopathy. Yeah. So here's another laden passage right before the end. Um, I broke and received him and reached him a flasson of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. You do not comprehend? He said. Not I replied. Then you are not of the Brotherhood. How? You are not of the Masons? Yes, yes, I said. Yes, yes. You? Impossible. A Mason? A Mason, I replied. A sign, he said. It is this, I answered, producing a trowel from beneath the folds of my roquelaire. You jest, he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. But let us proceed to the Amantillado. So what's the miscommunication here? What's Fortunato talking about, and what's Montresor talking about?
Okay. We have participant who writes Fortunato's continuing to insult Montresor by reminding him that he is not of the same social class, and it's unbelievable that Montresor could be a member of this society, the Masons.
That's great.
Uh,
Yeah, he's being very insulting and doesn't realize it. It's impossible that you're a Mason. I'm
mhm.
not sure it's exactly social class, but uh, it's a secret society that's a sign of an elite status. And yeah, and Fortunato's stressing that there's no way that Montresor could be part of this club. So that's great. Yeah, so he's digging his own grave, literally here. Only he's not the one with the trowel. Good. Is there anything else in the doubleness?
We have anything else here? He's going to he is of course Fortunato, or rather Montresor is literally going to be a Mason. Here is a good question: why is Mason not capitalized? Doesn't it have
Yeah.
something to do with bricklaying? Well, of course, yes, masonry does have bricklaying, but the Masons would be capitalized. Um, could we clarify that? What were the Masons? They were a secret society of general. It's all male. I don't know if it still is, and
Right.
I suspect it is. And
It, yeah.
it's an elite. It's kind of this doesn't do it justice, but the Masons were an international elite men's club.
Yep.
Um,
See,
a lot of
and
the
it's important that they were secret, and they
yeah,
helped each other, and they
yeah.
were elite, and you had to be invited to join. And they're very popular in the 19th century. I don't know much about them today, but they're often mentioned in 19th century literature.
Mhm.
The secret goings on of these societies that no one else knows about, and they themselves are not allowed to ever reveal. So it really does underscore that Montresor is an outsider and Fortunato's an insider. But then, of course, Mason is a bricklayer, and
Mhm.
so um, and that would make him a working man, right? To be a bricklayer. So Montresor is playing on class there, the idea that he's sort of owning up to the inferiority uh, in an ironic way that Fortunato attributes to him by saying, "Yeah, I lay bricks," and pretending that he doesn't understand the real meaning of the mason, of what a mason is.
Right.
Yep. So
And
that's
we
great.
one of our participants have noted that in the 1800s the Masons had some political influence as well. They were a lot of kind of secret power was ascribed to them because of their secrecy. And there are a lot of conspiracy theories that swirled around the Masons even into the 20th century. And they
Yep.
weren't just originally they weren't just bricklayers. They were more like architects, and so they were very valued in society, and they were able to travel around. And if you were if so that's what kind of gave them their prestige. And then they took other people in, not just bricklayers and architects, but as I said, it was considered a kind of elite, secret men's club.
Yep. That's great. And
Yeah, 14 presidents of the United States were Masons, to give you a sense
oh,
of the
awesome! I didn't know that. That's an
elites. Yes.
excellent fact.
Yeah. I think a lot of the founders in the 18th century were as well. So
Yeah.
they were
And well,
definitely, I mean,
so go ahead,
yeah,
Richard.
go ahead. Well, the point here,
Um,
I think, is that they were elite, and Montresor is definitely not one of them.
Yeah, he's not, and Fortunato is lording it over him. And yet he's so busy lording it over Montresor that he doesn't realize the strangeness of Montresor having a trowel with him, and
Hmm.
that he hid the trowel in his roquelaire. So, and even once he realizes it, he just figures it's a joke, doesn't ask any questions about it, and wants to proceed to the Amontillado. So here, Montresor couldn't reveal more explicitly what's going to go on in the future, and still, Fortunato, though he thinks he's superior, is allowing himself. No one's forcing him to bury himself alive. Um, uh, Everything that Montresor has said is allowing him to leave, and yet Fortunato continues because he's all he can think about is the Amontillado. So in a way, he's a monomaniac too. His monomania is the Amontillado.
And
And say again?
we've managed to confuse one of our participants. Uh,
Uh oh.
was it confusing? Was he powerful, or had he lost the power? Fortunato is a Mason, and so that signals his class. Montresor maybe never was a Mason. Montresor is feeling very inferior, and the fact that Fortunato is a Mason is just one more indication of his class, and one more thing probably that Montresor resents in Fortunato.
Yes, and Montresor is a Mason. Um, he's a Mason, meaning he's going to lay the bricks
Right.
that enclose. That's the only way he's a Mason. He's not a member of the secret society. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's the doubleness that's going on here. Um,
We have a question about the gesticulation. What might the gesticulation
oh,
have been?
that's a great question. Yeah, and that's something you see in a number of post tales. It's kind of a what do you call it? A raunchy joke, I think. Um, he repeated the movement, a grotesque one. So
Mhm.
he's asking you to imagine what the movement was, and there's a suggestion there. There are a lot of bad jokes in here, as we're noticing, and this is another bad joke, I think, where he's suggesting that it's a kind of a pornographic gesture um, to the reader, to titillate the reader. I think that's what's going on there.
But it's
Um,
also, but isn't it also one of the secret hand signs of the Masons by which
yeah.
they recognize each other?
Yes, that's the. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation. You can imagine what that gesticulation might be. Um,
Yeah.
I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. So, um, yes, it's the sign of the society. Um, but Montresor doesn't know the sign. It looks to him like it means something else,
Hmm.
right? Yeah.
Hmm. Okay.
Um,
Uh,
Poe does that quite frequently. People don't notice that, but he does it. He slips in little bad jokes.
mhm.
Um, and this is the very end of the story, um, and the final chapter in the double entendre, um, to underscore everything that's gone before. Fortunato says he's not quite understanding what's happening to him. But is it not getting late? Will they not be awaiting us at the palazzo? The Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone. Montresor said, Yes. I said, Let us be gone. Fortunato said, For the love of God, Montresor. And Montresor says, Yes. I said, For the love of God. But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, Fortunato. No answer. I called again, Fortunato. Um, so, what are the double meanings in this exchange? And why is Montresor so insistently? He seems to be taking pleasure in echoing what Fortunato says and gets disappointed when Fortunato doesn't answer. Um, so, what's happening in this passage?
Okay. What's going on here? Um, where Montresor is echoing Fortunato. If we think back to Montresor's theory about revenge, might help illuminate that. I think this is. Wouldn't you say, Eliza, that here he's trying to make sure that Fortunato is aware of what's happening to him, aware of his victimization?
Yeah, I think here he's trying to make Fortunato, of course, is drunk,
Hmm.
so he's a little slow. But Montresor is trying to show Fortunato what he's been doing all along with the double entendre, right?
Hmm.
So by echoing exactly what Fortunato says, he's giving it another meaning. Let us be gone. Fortunato wants to get out of there. Montresor says, Yes, let us be gone, suggesting, I'm looking forward to getting rid of you.
Hmm.
And by underscoring that so heavily, he's asking Fortunato to go back and think about all the other double meanings that have been underscored throughout the entire tale. So we start realizing why Montresor has been so interested in punning during the story. And yeah, I think he's trying to get Fortunato to realize it too, so that he can have the key to what has just happened to him while he thinks. Yeah.
One participant has asked, what I don't get is that there doesn't seem to be any recognition on the part of Fortunato. Well, this guy is, profoundly drunk. But in this passage, don't we see that he is beginning to become aware? He says, for the love of God, Montresor, and those are Poe's italics in the story, right?
Yes, those are in the story. For the
So,
yes, he's trying to pretend when he says, "But is it not getting late? Will they not be awaiting us at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest?" That suggests that he's in denial. But he
mhm.
being in denial means that you do realize you're starting to realize what's happening, and that you're in really serious trouble. And then, yeah, I think the for the love of God, Montresor, he finally realizes, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into here? Is Montresor really going to bury me alive? Um, so, yeah.
Yeah, we have a see, we have just been made a comment here that just passed. Well, we have gone means dead in the story. He's echoing what Montresor is, so he's um, mocking him. Uh, when one person writes, "Isn't the oxygen running out as well? Their flambeaux have dimmed by this point. Fortunato was sunken to the floor in shock." Uh, I don't think Fortunato has any clue that he's insulted Montresor, so he has no concept that Montresor wants revenge. So that just heightens, I think, the terror of the story. If you look at it from Fortunato's point of view, this is not only terrible, but it's just completely baffling. This seems utterly in cold blood. So I think that heightens the psychological terror here.
Yeah, great. And one of the reasons why I ask why Fortunato stops answering, well, there's no one answer to that, right? But it could be that he's fallen silent because he's starting to think, right? That the recognition, the processing of what's happening to him comes after the story ends. So there's another story to be told, and that's the story of whatever Fortunato is thinking about while he's walled up inside the tomb. I don't think that the oxygen is running out. It may be that I think the idea is, and that's the idea of premature burial, that he's going to be alive until um, he dies of dehydration or something. So he'll have plenty of time to think. He'll become sober over time, and then he'll have a chance to think too much about what's just happened and how he managed to get into this kind of situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so here are some. Are there any questions or thoughts about that?
So Poe here has actually written two stories. He's written the story, he's written Montresor's story about how he gets his revenge, but then he's allowed us to imagine Fortunato's story. And I think every reader of this story does imagine Fortunato's story once Montresor turns and walks away from the wall he's built.
Yes.
Pretty.
Yeah, and that's another that's a stress on the psychology, not just of Montresor, but the psychology of Fortunato, the psychology of the revenge. Fortunato is going to have plenty of time to think about all those overly obvious puns that Montresor made, and the fact that he never turned back and he had all these clues, and he was stupid enough to ignore them all, and that he will now have to acknowledge Montresor's prowess, or at least that's probably what Montresor is imagining.
Mhm.
That he'll finally realize that Montresor is an equal, not a subordinate to him. Um,
Right. I think Poe also understood the psychology of the reader because he knew that we would all be thinking about Fortunato's story post entombment.
Yes, exactly. So you close the book and you continue telling the story to yourself. There's a whole other chapter, and the reader will keep thinking about what. Hopefully, the reader will keep thinking about what he's just read. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
So these are wrap-up questions that help us think back over the story the way Fortunato's going to have to. So if we think back to the first paragraph, how does Montresor enact the revenge, and did he fulfill his precise requirements? Did he, one, punish with impunity, and did he, two, make himself felt as the avenger to the wrongdoer? And if you think he did, how did he do that? We've started to talk about that, but how did he fulfill? Did he fulfill his specific requirements mapped out in the introduction for achieving the perfect revenge? And then
Do
the
we
second
think
question.
he? Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to read the rest of the questions, but we can take them one by one.
Okay. Do we think he succeeded in his crime here? We have a speculation on that act of Montresor's when he throws the torch into the tomb. I think Montresor throws the torch so that Fortunato can see where he is for a while and contemplate his predicament. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And so that the reader can imagine what Fortunato looks like inside his little tomb. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we get an image too of the poor guy chained to the wall with in his silly costume with the
Yeah.
bells jingling. That's one of the last images we get is that the little bells jingle forlornly um, after Fortunato stops speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We have one
Good.
person here wonder why Fortunato can't push his way out because remember he's chained to the wall. So this
That's
is
right.
clearly premeditated. Montresor set this up. He put the chain there, found the little indentation in the catacombs where he could make his crypt. So yeah, and we have an interesting symbolic reading. The extinguishing of the torch is also symbolic with the extinguishing of Fortunato. And
Yeah.
in your
Right.
response to your question about did he get away with it, uh, as consensus seems to be that he did. It's been 50 years and no one has touched the bones. So yes,
Yep.
he has done so with impunity.
And did he make himself felt as the avenger to the wrongdoer? That's the other part of it. He has to get away with it, and the wrongdoer needs to know exactly uh, what the what the crime he's committed has been, like what he's being punished for. Um,
Well, our participants writing, but we don't really know the crime. I mean, if it's just being insulting, that's a huge punishment for giving an insult. But so
right.
we're not entirely sure. And then we
Well,
got
we can read the crime by the punishment. So
Mhm.
it's fun. That's another funny thing about the story. We have to imagine what the crime is because the narrator has said that he's going to make the punishment fit the crime. We have to look at the punishment in order to imagine what the crime is. Um,
Mhm.
so the crime has got to be something about making Montresor feel invisible and making him feel as if he's dead while he's alive, right? Because it's another thing he never tells us, but he asks us to imagine because of the stipulation of how he's going to tell his story.
Mhm. That's a good
So and
point.
then
So
yeah,
go ahead.
well, and we'll talk a little more about that, but um, how will the victim be aware of the precision of the retribution, and what will Fortunato be thinking while he's buried alive in his tomb? So that's the way we're going to be. Montresor has been careful to make him think what he needs to think in order to understand that he has been punished properly. So whatever Fortunato's thinking inside that tomb is supposed to help him understand what he did wrong in the first place. And that should help us understand what Fortunato did wrong as well as we imagine that.
So
Yeah.
we have some interesting comments here about the telling of this story. If this story, what does the telling of the story mean? Does it mean that Montresor feels guilty? Is he confessing?
Yeah.
Is he telling this story really being arrogant and sort of crowing over his success? of Montresor of his success over Fortunato 50 years later? We don't know that.
Those are all great possibilities. There is a suggestion of, and people have raised this. Some people, I think it's overstated, the idea that he feels guilty and he's confessing on his deathbed. Because, yeah, it's 50 years later and he's finally revealing his crime. So it may be that he's felt guilty his whole life and is now compelled to tell. But it could also be that he's really proud that he never got caught. And so for 50 years, he's been celebrating the fact that no one has managed to figure out what he did. And now he finally has to tell someone so that people understand how wonderful he is before he dies. Yeah, I think it's very ambiguous. It could be either. And I agree. I see the post saying he's bragging. I agree that the tone is more of bragging than of feeling guilty. So that's great.
Yeah, you could almost say that there is a third element in his notion of revenge that he's left unstated until now. He has to get away with impunity. His victim has to know that he is being victimized. But given Montresor's psychology, none of this matters unless somebody knows about his success. That
Yeah,
his bragging is what will rescue him from invisibility. So
that's
presumably
yeah,
he's been
that's
invisible for
great.
50 years, and now he's bragging.
Yeah, and actually, like he can dream that Fortunato has understood the perfection of his crime, but Fortunato really hasn't given any indication that he's all that bright. So it
Yeah.
may have been lost on Fortunato, which means that Montresor needs to make sure that someone else gets how brilliant he is. So eventually he has to tell the story. Yeah. Um,
We have an interesting comment here that I noticed in the story too. And it may be a little twinge of guilt on Montresor's part when he says, "My heart grew faint,
Faint.
but it was the dampness of the catacombs that was the cause."
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Ambiguity there. Yeah,
Yeah,
well
he might
noted.
be the same way that Fortunato blocks out what's happening to him. Montresor
Mhm.
might be repressing his sense of guilt. And you get that in that line. My heart grew faint, but really it was just the mold in the catacombs or whatever. That's right. That's a great thing to point out. And that increases the ambiguity of how he's feeling about what he's done. Um,
Okay.
So here's a kind of wrap up of the sorts of things that of um, how he punishes with impunity, and how the crime fits the punishment, and how Fortunato is made to understand what he did wrong. So the idea is, I think that live burial is perfectly appropriate to whatever crime Fortunato has committed. Fortunato ignores Montresor's distinction and his nearly dead family line, and that's shown by him not knowing the coat of arms. While Fortunato has fame, fortune, family, friends, social standing, he has a lady Fortunato. Montresor does not. Um, so Montresor then, in punishment, insists that Fortunato know finally what it feels like to be buried alive, which is a situation that Fortunato has repeatedly consigned him to, being buried alive in the family vault. That's how Montresor has been feeling, and that is what he makes Fortunato feel. Um, so in this way, Montresor instructs Fortunato on his coat of arms. He acts out the scenario of his family motto so that Fortunato never forgets his coat of arms again, so that he learns it by heart, and that he learns the motto of the coat of arms: no one offends me with impunity. So whether or
We
not
have it.
Fortunato gets it, we certainly get that he has perfectly exacted a crime fitting the initial crime that inspires him to seek revenge.
We have an interesting comment here. I think Poe often wrote narrators as himself or how he was feeling at the time. I know there's a lot of psychological interpretation of Poe. Has any critic suggested that this story may be maybe Poe might be a Montresor, that he is overlooked in the literary world? other people are getting the attention he wants, and this is his,
Yeah. Yeah.
revenge upon all those literary lions of whom he is
Exactly
not
right.
one.
Yeah, there is a historical reading. You're right, Richard, that by psychoanalytic readings of Poe have abounded. So for a long time, people did look for the ways that um, Montresor was Poe, and someone has done a reading. I can't reiterate it perfectly, but a reading that Montresor is Poe, and he's seeking revenge on the more successful literary figures of his time who make more money, who are more famous, and yet they're not as brilliant as he is. And
Hmm.
you can certainly see how that would play out, especially because of the play with language. Poe would be showing his rivals how much better he is at writing than they are, and that they are more famous because people don't realize what greatness is, and they can't appreciate Poe's greatness. So that has been a reading of this particular story, and people look for clues about who the people are that who the specific literary figures are that Poe is attacking in the story. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm. And we have
but
a
that can also yeah.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Well, that can also be overstated, I want to say, because first person narration makes you want to think that the narrator is the writer. And Poe knew that and played around with that. So Poe himself was not a homicidal maniac
Yeah, yeah.
in any way. He also wasn't, he didn't take drugs that anyone knows. He did have a drinking problem, but that's more associated here with Fortunato than with Montresor. So one has to be careful of the biographical reading, I think, and even though it is very tempting. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so that you just responded to two comments in the chat. So then Poe is depicting himself as a braggart? No, not necessarily. And what about stories like Bernice or The Black Cat, though? Are we applying this historical psychological lens to all his stories or just this one? I don't see it in all of his writing. So, yes, take Eliza's admonition to heart. You can't always combine, in a first person
Yeah.
narrator, it's not always a
Especially
stand in for the author.
it is an occasion in my classes with my students. They often come in with this idea that Poe is like his deranged narrators, and it's an occasion to talk about the power of the first person narrative because he somehow makes you think that he is like his crazy people, but that uh, and that might help his celebrity. The same way it works with celebrities today. Someone like Johnny Depp, who even in his private life suggests that he's a mysterious, a dark figure, but that doesn't mean that Poe is like his first-person narrators. People tend to conflate the two.
Okay.
Uh,
We have a comment here that moves us on to our next point. If I can find it again, where did it go? Here it is. Um, there was also a story in a New York newspaper about a body that had been buried upright in a cathedral in Italy. This was published around the same time as when Poe would have been writing. So we're going to get to that, but before we do, let's talk about unity of effect.
Okay, well, or we can talk about that now. I don't think I have a slide on. So that's about premature burial. The question.
Well, it's the one about the source of the story. I think we do have a slide
Oh, the
on
sources of
that.
right. Okay, yeah. So we will get to that quite soon.
Okay.
But yeah, first I just wanted to note that Poe has a theory about how to write stories, and he's famous for this theory. And the word that comes the phrase that comes out of it that people often refer to is the unity of effect, and he talks about it in a number of places. He was a great admirer of Nathaniel Hawthorne. And this one passage comes from a review of Hawthorne's Tales, where he talks about what makes a good short story, what makes a good work of art. Um, he didn't like novels because they're too long, and so he preferred the short story. and this is why. The ordinary novel is objectionable from its length, for reasons already stated in substance. As it cannot be read at one sitting, it deprives itself, of course, of the immense force derivable from totality. Worldly interests intervening during the pauses of perusal modify, annul, or counteract, in a greater or less degree, the impressions of the book. But simple cessation in reading would of itself be sufficient to destroy the true unity. In the brief tale, however, the author is enabled to carry out the fullness of his intention, be it what it may. During the hour of perusal, the soul of the reader is at the writer's control. There are no external or intrinsic influences resulting from weariness or interruption. So you can see that he loves the idea of gripping the reader totally. He doesn't want anyone going to the refrigerator to get a glass of water. He's thinking in the ways that we think about, I think, movies or television shows that aren't interrupted by commercials. He wants to grab onto you and hold you to the end of the story. And that's the important idea of unity effect, one of the important. He wants you to be in the right mood the whole time, and he wants to slip into this alternative state of reality and feel it fully. And then there's another quote that gives you some more information about his idea of unity effect. I think this is from another review. A skillful literary artist has constructed a tale. If wise, he has not fashioned his thoughts to accommodate his incidents, but having conceived with deliberate care a certain unique or single effect to be wrought out, he then invents such incidents, he then combines such events as may best aid him in establishing this preconceived effect. If his very initial sentence tend not to the outbringing of this effect, then he's failed in his first step. In the whole composition, there should be no word written of which the tendency, direct or indirect, is not to the one pre-established design. So there's a question of whether he himself manages to achieve the unity effect in Cask of Amontillado, or if you can find extraneous details, and what is the unique or single effect that he's trying to convey. So the main point he's making here is that the story has to be super hyper coherent. And in another place, he talks about how it's best to write the story backwards from the end. That's one way of making sure that there are no extraneous details.
And a participant writes, this reminds me of the common core writing responses. How does the author create an effect? How does the author use literary elements, devices to advance that effect? And I think what we've covered here tonight really would address those kind of common core close reading questions.
Yep, that's exactly right. And you can go back from this passage, you could go back to the first paragraph that we looked at and think about how he's already, in the first paragraph, he says, what does he say in the first paragraph? When he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. And that is exactly what the story is about throughout. So this is one way. Poe is very interested in achieving effects, feelings in the reader. And this story is a great way to talk about how he goes about doing that.
Right, and we have a comment here. I think he does a great job of horrifying us by how cold-blooded and calculating he is throughout the entire story, all because of an insult. And that's true. He not only, leads Fortunato down into the depths of the catacombs, he is also, of course, leading us there too. We can't turn back either, because this story is so compelling.
Yes. Yeah, and remember that these stories are forms of entertainment before film and television. So people responded to reading in a much more powerful way than a lot of our students do today. And that's a good way, that's an important thing to underscore to students. It would be great if they could get into the zone where they're thinking about reading as the only form of entertainment, to help them get immersed in this experience of terror that you're describing. Yeah.
Right. And now we come to what some of our participants were talking about earlier, the story that Poe read about somebody being buried in a wall in Italy. So we want to
Yes,
why
it's a
don't we move
true
ahead now?
story. Yes, this is the one source. Lots of people have speculated about the sources for the story, the things that inspired Poe, and the things he drew on to write the story. This is the clearest source for the story, and it comes from a passage in Joseph Headley's "A Man Built in the Wall" from Letters of Italy, written in 1845, a year before Cask of Amontillado was written. Headley tells the story of how he visits a church, and one of the tourist attractions in the church is on display is a skeleton that had been found buried inside a church wall, bricked up alive. And this is his um, imagination of how that skeleton, he doesn't know how that, no one knows how the skeleton got there, but Headley tells himself a story of how the skeleton got inside the wall, and this is his story. The workman began at the feet, and with his mortar and trowel, built up with the same carelessness he would exhibit in filling any broken wall. The successful enemy stood leaning on his sword, a smile of scorn and revenge on his features, and watched the face of the man he hated but no longer feared. It was slow work fitting the pieces nicely so as to close up the aperture with precision. With care and precision, the last stone was fitted in the narrow space. The trowel passed smoothly over it. A stifled groan, as if from the center of a rock, broke the stillness. One strong shiver, and all was over. The agony had passed. Revenge was satisfied, and a secret locked up for the great revelation day. So, what does Poe take from this passage? And this passage helps us see how generally popular this sort of idea was, because Headley's letters from Italy about his tour of Italy were popular, and here he's imagining a Gothic scenario. But what does Poe take from the passage, and how does he transform it? How is his story based on the passage, but different from the passage?
Well, we have one which has been wrote that he fleshes it out with characters and gives a motivation here. We have another
Yeah.
point here. Let me find it again. There it is. Um, okay, I managed to lose it here in the chat. Oh, here it is. Um, the people claim that the skeleton was found in an area in the church that only noblemen would have had access to.
Oh,
Um,
that's interesting. Uh-huh.
yeah. Another person writes, I don't get the impression that the person was walled alive. The stifled groan and strong shiver combined with the idea that the man was armed with a sword seems to suggest the walling up of a body. So maybe it was just a grave. Uh, let's see, what else do we have?
Yeah,
Um,
it's true. It's ambiguous whether the guy that's being walled up is alive or dead, whether it's just the hiding of a crime of murder or whether he's burying the guy alive. Um,
right.
so that's
So
true.
we say here, another person writes, he's added imagination and embellishments. In other words, he has turned this into fiction. Yeah, Poe. This is the end point of the story, and that Poe has gotten his end point, which as you said, he likes to start with the end point, and from here he moved backwards. He explained, uh,
That's
perhaps,
great.
how a
Yeah,
skeleton would have ended up in a wall.
exactly. That's wonderful. And yeah, I agree that he adds characterization and psychology to the scene.
Hmm.
So it's hinted at here that the successful enemy stood leaning on his sword. So some kind of crime. He's getting revenge for something, but we don't know anything about these people. Yeah, so Poe adds the psychological component to the story, and that makes the story far more interesting than this also very interesting passage. So that's one thing. That's the source, and then people asked earlier about whether other people wrote stories like this. Well, they did, starting in the kind of late 18th century. And Monk Lewis, he gained his name Monk from his popular story, The Monk, an English. The Gothic tradition started in Europe. And this is a passage from an early Gothic story written about 50 years before Poe's, and it gives you a sense of the Gothic tradition from which Poe's story sprang, and helps underscore the differences, like what changes in the 50 years between Monk Lewis's story and Poe's. So here's a passage from the Monk. I looked before me, an abyss presented itself to my affrighted eyes, and a steep and narrow staircase whither my conductors were leading me. I shrieked and started back. I implored compassion, rent the air with my cries, and summoned both heaven and earth to my assistance. In vain! I was hurried down the staircase and forced into one of the cells which lined the cavern's sides. My blood ran cold as I gazed upon this melancholy abode. The cold vapors hovering in the air, the walls green with damp, the bed of straw so forlorn and comfortless, the chain destined to bind me forever to my prison, and the reptiles of every description, which as the torches advanced towards them I descried hurrying to their retreats, struck my heart with terrors almost too exquisite for nature to bear. So this was written 50 years before Poe's story. What Gothic elements persist, and they even persist to the present day. The Gothic is big now as well, so it's amazing how persistent this mode is.
We have
But
one
then I'll,
major
yeah,
we have one major distinction. Lewis tells the tale from the eyes of the victim, while Poe narrates from the killer's perspective.
that's great, and that's an important difference, isn't it? Yep. Yeah.
And as far as the elements of the Gothic, the mood, the details, the emotion of fear, the cold vapors, the green damp walls, the bugs, the slime. Yeah.
Great.
And
Yeah,
the
all those
passage.
things are Gothic, and there, wherever Gothic stories are, you see all this apparatus. It's very architectural. The
Yeah.
Gothic. It's all about enclosed, hidden spaces. Yep.
Yeah, and another participant writes, the passage reminds me of the pit and the pendulum. It's a good
Oh,
comparison
exactly.
indeed.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's where he really plays on the 18th century Gothic tradition, that story. Exactly. It's far more externalized when you think about how Poe's tale is different from Lewis's. Here, the horrors are external. They're of Germany, not of the soul, if we remember Poe's earlier comment, right? In the later one, those things are horrifying. It's horrible to think of Fortunato alone with all the skeletons and bones in the catacomb. But more horrifying is the psychology of what's gone on, the ways he has to think about what his friend has done to him, and how he allowed that to happen.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, implicit versus explicit. And I think, too, the horror
Yes, yes,
of that
exactly.
story, the horror of the
And it,
Poe story is I think, also um, that the sort of identification with evil that he inculcates in the reader. I think that intensifies our horror.
yes, exactly. It's more of a mental. It has to do more with the way we feel. And as someone said, implicit versus explicit, or interior or psychological versus exterior or architectural. I think that's right. That's great.
Hmm.
This is another context, and I think this is our final context. Um, yeah, just wanted to make sure because I know we're running out of time. But temperance fiction was huge in Poe's time, and that's a genre of sensation thriller that tried to convince people not to drink because the idea was that drinking was creating havoc in society and destroying families. And so temperance writers wrote against drinking by giving cautionary tales. And one of the best sellers of this sort was T.S. Arthur's 10 Nights in a Barroom from 1854. And you'll see the ways that Poe is playing around with temperance fiction in Cask of Amontillado. It's not that he read this because this is written later, but you'll see that it's part of a genre. Instantly, the young man, infuriated by drink and evil passions, threw the bottle at his father's head. The dangerous missile fell, crashing upon one of his temples, shivering it into 100 pieces. A heavy, jarring fall too surely marked the fearful consequences of the blow. When we gathered around the fallen man and made an effort to lift him from the floor, a thrill of horror went through every heart. A mortal paleness was already on his marred face, and the death gurgle in his throat. And 3 minutes from the time the blow was struck, his spirit had gone upward to give an account of the deeds done in the body. Frank Slade, you have murdered your father. So we see in the Cask of Amontillado the ways that, can you see how Poe is adapting and using these temperance fiction modes to help him with his story, Cask of Amontillado. So Fortunato wouldn't have gotten into the situation that he had gotten himself into if he hadn't been so obsessed with drinking, and if he hadn't himself been drunk at the time. And you can see that this story also underscores what can happen to you if you drink too much. But there's a question of whether Poe's story is a temperance fiction. The story he wrote that's closest to a temperance fiction is The Black Cat, which is about a man who kills his wife, buries an axe in her brain, and takes the eye out of his cat when he's drinking. So that is very much a temperance fiction. But this one has elements of it.
So, Eliza, can we say that the moral of the Cask of Amontillado is that if you drink too much, you're going to get plastered?
Exactly.
Let me put in
it probably is a pun that Poe thought about if plastered had the same meaning at the time.
Let me put in a plug here. If our participants want to do some work on 10 Nights in a Barroom, I don't mean going to a barroom for 10 nights, but if they want to see a close reading of that, go to America in Class Lessons. We have a piece on social reform literature that does do a close reading of 10 Nights in a Barroom, and it juxtaposes it with elements from Ken Burns's film Prohibition. So if you want to explore Arthur's book, and it's a key passage, we do a close reading of it. So I recommend that to you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end here. Are there any final questions before we wrap things up? See, I don't think the drinking was as serious in Cask as it is here. Even if Fortunato wasn't drunk, he still have followed him. The story is more about trust. Yes, at the end of the day, it probably is all the more about
it's a lot more complicated than just the drinking there.
Yeah, making it a temperance story really seems to drain it of a whole lot of energy, but still, it's one interesting way to consider it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please use the forum to continue the discussion and share fresh approaches. We'll monitor the forum up until the 19th, and we'll pass your questions and comments on to Eliza, and we'll get back in touch with you. Please check americaInClass.org for our upcoming seminars, and let me remind you again to submit your evaluations. Eliza, let me thank you for giving us an excellent seminar tonight. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and I hope our participants did. Thank you very much.
And thank you for your questions. I really enjoyed talking to you this evening.
Yes, and let me thank our participants. We had a lot of chat, a lot of really interesting discussion, a lot of insightful remarks. Thank you so much, and I hope you'll be able to take the material back into your classes and use it well. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll be back with us again for another seminar soon. Our spring schedule is up. We